We're so glad you're here with us. If I haven't met you yet, my name is Shane Schlesman. It's my privilege to pastor this church right here in Richmond, Virginia. If you're watching online, we hope to meet you in person. We're so grateful to have you with us today. I've got a monitor here with me. I can take a look at your comments and love to see that interaction today. But we're actually in week 2 of a sermon series you're joining us in called Stress Test. Stress Test. And we designed this series around this concept that God has a lot to say in helping us walk through seasons of stress. And even if you don't believe in God, or you don't come to church, or you do, or it doesn't, you believe in stress and you have a lot of it. We knew that. So we want to look at what God says about our stressful seasons. I've got some help with me today. I bringing in the big guns. I've got Sue with me today because here's our topic today. We want to talk about grief. All of us walk through seasons of grief, and it can be incredibly stressful. Very, very stressful. And so Sue has written a lot in articles and her blog and her book regarding this topic of grief, and helped a lot of people walk through these various seasons of grief. And so I've asked her to come and join me today as we begin to talk about what it looks like to walk through that season. Last week, when we began Stress Test, we talked about Jesus' words in Matthew, and we're going to look at Jesus' words again in Matthew in just a moment, if you have a Bible or a device and want to start getting ahead of the game. But he said, "Come to me, all of you who have heavy burdens. Come to me, all of you who are weary." You're tired, you're exhausted. Anybody tired, exhausted? Good, because you're his target audience today, okay? Come to me, all of you. Doesn't matter if you believe in God, don't. If you come to church, don't come to church. Come, all of you who are weary, who have heavy burdens, and I will give you, remember the word? Rest. I will give you rest. And he said not just rest for your bodies, not just rest for your minds, but actually rest for your soul. And we saw a lot of people last week, their lives transformed as they began to see what it looks like for their lives to follow Jesus. And we like to celebrate that transformation around here. In fact, we're going to end our series on November 14th. And then on November 21st, we're going to celebrate the transformation taking place in people's lives with baptism. And we're going to have a baptism service on November 21st, and say, well, maybe you were baptized as a child. That's okay, because this is an opportunity for you to be baptized, making a statement of transformation. It's a statement to the world to say, God is transforming my life, and I want to go public with it. So if you're online, you're watching, or you're here, sign up. It's Vicky Stanton, V Stanton at WEAG, or you can go to our website, click on that. But don't miss that chance to celebrate all that God's doing in your life. We know that all of us have experienced loss in 2020. We need to start adding 2021 to that, right? Because all of us have experienced a lot of loss, haven't we? And where there is loss, there is stress. Where there is loss, there is stress. And Sue and I have been in this conversation about grief, and we want to invite you this morning to join us. We've actually been in a leadership cohort together, and they brought in a great Christian counselor who said this statement and at the beginning and said, what is the number one issue facing the church today? The number one issue facing the church today. And that answer was grief. It was grief. So where there is loss, there is grief. And where there is grief, there is grieving. And where there's grieving, God actually gives us intentional process for mourning. And so as we're talking through this today, here's some defining words that we want you to know what we mean when we say grief, grieving, mourning. Grief is a feeling. It's a feeling. Grieving is a process, and mourning is an intentional process. In fact, God actually gave us mourning so we wouldn't get stuck in our grief. Here's what Matthew said, recorded Jesus' word, as Jesus said these words in Matthew chapter 5. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. You see, all of us have loss. And in Jesus' time, when they heard these words, they knew deeply and understood mourning in a deep way. In fact, they had professional mourners who would come and help the family or help individuals actually walk through a process of mourning, because that was the process that God designed so we wouldn't get stuck in our stress. And sometimes, and some of us, you may feel like, I don't know if I'm grieving today. I don't know if I'm grieving. Well, where there is loss, have you experienced the loss? Okay, then you are experiencing a feeling of grief. And we want to help you today learn to measure, manage, and move through these seasons of grief into a process of mourning. But before we do that, first, we have to learn to measure our grief and take a little bit of a test today, so to speak, and discover, hey, where am I at with this grief? So how do we do that?
First of all, I just want to say thank you for letting me join you. Somehow, over the course of my life, God keeps putting me in the path of grieving people. And so I guess the great thing is all that grief therapy is going to good use. Yes. I've had a lot of grief therapy because I've had a lot of grief.
We have good counselors. Praise Jesus.
Amen for good counselors. And it's such a testimony of God's love and compassion for us that he provides a framework for us to work through grief, and that there is hope on the other side. You may have heard of the 5 stages of grief. It's pretty much common knowledge when talking about grief and mourning that there are 5 basic stages of grief. A psychologist, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, came up with this years ago. I read a book on death and dying. I didn't realize, and then shortly after, sometime after she, with another Dr. David Kessler, they came up with On Grief and Grieving, and what they use are they identified these 5 stages of grief that happen. Initially with patients who were in terminal illnesses, they noticed these 5 stages that developed, and they thought that they were perhaps linear, that you started with denial and then you moved to anger and bargaining, you moved through these stages, and then they realized, no, it's not just a person that's experiencing loss, but loss is collateral, and everybody around that situation can feel loss, and we can feel loss for a number of reasons. It doesn't have to be death. It could be divorce, could be loss of a job, loss of health, just a change in culture. A number of things can cause us to grieve, and these 5 stages show up, and they notice that sometimes grieving people turn back on them. They don't necessarily do them in order, that they can circle back and they can get stuck in one of these stages or 2 of these stages. And so that's why I want to present them to you, not to necessarily give you a micro therapy lesson, but to help you identify that there are significant stages that grieving people go through. And our goal is the acceptance. And then Dr. Kessler actually in 2020 added a 6th stage, because what we've experienced as a nation is collective grief. Everybody has shared a similar grief. And this hasn't happened since 9/11, that the whole country has shared in a collective grief like we have in this last year and a half. And the final stage that they added was meaning. People are looking for closure, and so they want all of this to mean something in the end, to be worth it. So I just want to quickly go through these 6 stages, and if you could just try to figure out, where am I? Like, where do I get stuck in loss? We all have loss. We don't even have to enumerate them. We know what we've lost. We've lost the ability to be in relationship with the same people. We've lost friendships. We've lost family members. We've lost
or lost health. I mean, I saw someone in the chat,
yeah.
we're praying for someone to recover from stage 4 cancer. JBD, we're praying for you. When you walk through that, that's huge, right? So you're losing your health too.
Yeah. So let's just quick go through these. The first one is denial. That's obvious, right? If there's an accident or an illness, when my mother got dementia, the denial was at the diagnosis, right? You don't want to admit that this trajectory has begun at this moment. In 10 years, she will not be here. This is the way this is going. There's a denial with diagnosis. There's denial when someone suddenly dies, when you have an accident, or when there's like a natural catastrophe like we have experienced. We can get stuck there, and I think we know people that got stuck there in COVID. This isn't true, this is not happening, right? And I'm not here to debate all of that, but we all process loss differently. So some people get stuck in like, you know what, we're just not gonna address the issue. The second stage is anger. I'm an Enneagram 1, so this is my go-to response. You can get stuck in anger.
But you do it in such a kind way. It's just...
All right. I was going to say something, but we won't go there.
Since you're Enneagram 1, you perfect it.
That's right. I'm good at it. Okay. So anger is not bad, and it's a natural response to loss and to grief. But what happens if we get stuck in anger is we get hostile, or we get bitter, or we need to blame people for something that has happened. And because you can't just keep it inside. That's what causes all the anxiety and the stress and the physical issues that happen.
Somebody's responsible.
Somebody has to pay, and eventually we're going to figure out who that person is. It's just going to come out all around us, and I think we all have seen quite enough of that. So someone needs to blame.
Let's move to
someone
the next
needs to be blamed. Yeah.
Please.
Well, I just want to say real fast, anger when you're grieving, like you can keep circling back to anger and not even be like physically or cognitively aware that you don't feel angry, but it can just pop out. And that's just the body trying to process grief. I remember when I went to pick up the plaque from my mom's bench. So when my mother died, she's never lived in town, and she's buried in Illinois next to my father. But I didn't have a place to go to. And I felt like that was really necessary for part of my mourning process, is to have a space for the grief, to be able to go back someplace and just sit. I mean, I have her things all over my house, so I'm thinking about her every day, all the time. But I wanted some sort of a memorial locally. So I went to Deep Run Park. I got a plaque made for a bench right where every time she would visit, and she visited all the time, we would take the kids to feed the ducks and throw the bread in the pond. And there's this little, this really beautiful place. And so I got this plaque made, and I remember trying to prepare myself to be sad when I picked it up, or to be, I don't know, just, a little out of sync. I was a little bit anxious about it, but I was excited about it. I felt like this was a good thing. And I remember walking into the trophy store to get the plaque, and I was just overcome with rage. Like I just felt like this anger in me that I'm here in this place getting this plaque. I didn't vent on anybody. I wasn't mad at anybody. I just felt inside of me, my whole system just felt anger. And if you've been in places of grieving, you know that it can just come out. You can just feel it. Stage 3 is bargaining. This is a real intellectual response to trauma, is to try to figure out how to solve this. If I hadn't gone there, if I hadn't been in the car that night, this wouldn't have happened. If I had been a better wife, he wouldn't have left. If I had been a better parent, my child would not have made this decision. If the government hadn't done this, then this wouldn't happen. If you had done this, then this wouldn't happen. And it can mix in with blame and with anger, but it's not productive. We can get stuck there trying to figure out, well, if they would just do this, then the problem would be solved. And that doesn't move me in my grieving process. It makes me double down, because I'm going to fix this, or someone's going to fix this, and I know exactly how it should be done. And when we're grieving, we really do not have the ability to make those decisions. Because we can only see the small slice of our life where we're hurting. We can't see a bigger picture. And so bargaining is really unproductive.
And then when we stay asking those questions that are never answered, what happens next? And we go into more feeling.
Yeah, it's not productive. Well, and it might take this path, but it might not take this path. And the fourth stage is depression.
True.
Which is what we tend to think this is when people are grieving, that they're going to live in this state of eternal sadness, not want to do anything, not want to go anywhere, not want to interact. And depression is very much a physical problem. There's exhaustion, there's entrapment, there's fear, there's an inability for connection. And I think what we tend to forget with grief and loss is that we get stuck in it because we can't see a life outside of the life that we knew. We can't see how we could go on and things could be better than they used to be. And so there's this discoloration of the past as if nothing bad ever happened. And there's this gloom that's put on the future as if nothing good could come out of something that's innately bad.
So would it be fair to say that when you're in denial, you try to avoid ever seeing the loss, or you don't see it?
Right. And when you're in depression, that's all you see is the loss.
Okay.
And both of those
totally
prevent you from looking forward to the future, which is the essence of the gospel. The gospel is something terrible happened so that something better could come in the future. But stage 5 is acceptance. This is what we're going for, and this is what well-meaning people try to push grieving people into, by saying, it's been 2 years. I think it's time to get back out there. Or, how long is this going to take? You really, you've been sad long enough. Let's get back in the game, or whatever. And acceptance has to come in my own process by doing these other stages in whatever order and whatever way that they need to be done. But acceptance is an understanding. I'm no longer denying the grief that I'm in. I've traced it back. I know where it came from. And I am able to see the possibilities in the future. The 6th stage then would be meaning. This is probably the only stage where you can handle somebody quoting Romans 8:28 at you. If you know all things work together for good to those that love God. That doesn't work in other stages. You're not ready for that. Like, I believe it, but I'm really not ready for you to tell it to me. And when we get to meaning and acceptance, there's the idea that my faith has sustained the grieving process, that I believe that God could do something with this thing. Dr. Kessler came up with, because he realized that people need closure. They want closure when they've gone through this process, like a grieving process, or there's collective grief. Like, let's figure out how to stop this and make this all make sense. And that's really kind of an unrealistic expectation of grief, because when you've lost someone, nothing can replace that, having that person back or having that relationship restored. And even if the relationship can be restored, there's no undoing the betrayal or the harm that caused the relationship to break up in the first place. So closure is not necessarily a realistic term, but the idea that God could bring meaning or purpose to something is where we're headed.
It's like when Peter says to grieve with hope.
Right.
To grieve with hope, knowing that what's possible, that even in all of these phases, and listen, if we're truly honest, as a church family, collectively, we are grieving loss. As a church, what happens is in a group, and you start to lose it. I remember we could walk through these phases right through 2020 and right through it, and I did it. We talked about it. It was like, man, back in March when the pandemic hit, it was like we were talking about, by Easter. Leadership was talking like by Easter. We were planning. We were like in faith. We're going to plan. And you kind of live in that place, and then you get frustrated with it, and you can even get angry about it. You can get depressed about it, and then you start to lose. And everywhere you turn, and people, we had no idea that in 2020 suddenly your political affiliation would be announced by like what you do or say or post, or if you wear a mask or don't wear a mask, or it's suddenly Suddenly the whole world got divided and loss has been experienced. But if we don't call it what it is, we'll never enter a grieving process. And if we don't learn to grieve this, we'll get stuck. And Jesus said this, even Jesus did this. He modeled this for us. Matthew records that after Jesus heard that his cousin John the Baptist was beheaded, unjustly murdered for giving the gospel, and his cousin was snuffed out in such a horrific way, here's what Jesus did. Verse 13 of chapter 14. When he heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. We need to follow Jesus' example. Whether you follow him or not, you need to follow this in your life. You need to make space and create intentional moments to grieve. Because not only is it important to measure the fact that have loss, so we have grief, but it's also important to manage it. It's important to manage that grief. And so once we've identified, as Sue was talking about, maybe some of these stages or cycles or phases are showing up in your life, well, maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe there's some loss that perhaps you need to pay attention to. Maybe you need to carve out some time, like Jesus did, to actually contemplate this, because pop culture would say, well, if you're grieving, nothing's out of bounds in grieving, right? In other words, do whatever helps you. Whatever helps you, do that. Whatever pill helps you, whatever process helps you, going to Chick-fil-A for the milkshake every day through the drive-through, stepping up to, I kind of have my progression, you got I start with the Chick-fil-A, but then, Cookout, they go next level for me, and I know you some Sonic fans out there and stuff, okay, and if we're really, really feeling fancy, we go to Applebee's, but that's...
Brother.
But, I'm kind of grieving that, actually. I could go for a milkshake these days.
Okay, keep moving.
I'm grieving that. But we fill in the blank. We literally fill in the blank because pop culture says fill it in with whatever. Fill it in with relationships. Fill it up with tons of television, as much as you don't think about anything. Whatever helps you not think about that, then that's what you want to do. And Jesus did the exact opposite.
Right.
He actually went in a boat to think about it, to contemplate it privately, or else we get stuck. If we follow pop culture's advice, more alcohol, more time away, more vacation, then we may get stuck and never. So how do we not just identify it, but how do we then begin to manage this?
So in order to not get stuck in the mad and sad cycles, one suggestion, well, I'm a big writer and a journaler, but what we actually did this summer without realizing, there's this thing called a loss list. And we started itemizing where we felt loss. Because unless we know where the beginning point is, then we can't really start on this journey to get to the ending point. We just stay in this muck of everything's terrible, nothing's like it used to be, I hate everything, and we can't actually mourn. We just stay in this grief, this pit of I hate life. So I suggest doing a loss list. And a loss list is figuring out, where do I feel the emptiness? Where do I feel like something's been taken from me? What is not happening that used to happen that I'm missing? And a lot of times we think it's a current thing. Well, I just hate wearing a mask. That's not really the issue, right? There are many, many layers of issues that get me to the point where I don't like the place that I am currently. And so if we're upset about something, whatever upsets us, let's try to trace it back to what is really the starting point. Where was something taken, either by my own fault or just life? Where was something taken away? And grieve that loss. There's also this issue of collateral loss. Okay, so maybe I have a friendship, and during this last year, it got tense because we didn't look at things the same way. And it started becoming difficult to have conversations. And so we started avoiding certain topics so that we could stay in a friendship. And then that just becomes too strained. And then maybe they're in my church. And so eventually they decide, you know what, I just can't deal with whatever this position is. So we're leaving. And so what we notice is that it's not just the one thing. It's not just COVID, or it's not just politics, or it's not just something else we disagree about. There becomes a loss of a friendship, a feeling of betrayal in the friendship, a feeling of a family, leaving the family, because the church is a family. So then the places we served, or the things that we did, the trips we took, the hangouts, like it starts spreading its tentacles to all the places where we interacted. And so I feel loss in multiple areas. Nothing is the same. This is why death of a family member is so impactful, because it spreads into every part of your life, and it affects your memories because you miss those and you cherish them, and you're not able to make new ones. And then it affects everything going forward, because there's this hole where this person ought to be. And so it's very easy to slip right back into the anger or the bargaining or the depression.
So every time you would have made a call or would have had a text or would have had...
There's this loss. And so the loss doesn't go away. Making a loss list helps me identify what am I actually upset about, because a lot of times I'm taking it out on something that's actually not so important. And then learning to lament the loss. So this is huge in Scripture. I don't know why we don't spend more time talking about it. So many Psalms, 20, 30 Psalms that David wrote, and other people that wrote Psalms, are laments. They are lamentations to the Lord about a problem. Sometimes it's just, my life sucks type of idea. And sometimes it's, Lord, I just need you to kill my enemy. I'm just so frustrated. I'm so upset. I feel so alone. Laments are beautiful. When I don't know what to pray, I just go and find a psalm that's a lament, and I just pray God's words right back to him, because like, if God's okay with putting this in the Bible, this is a fantastic prayer. I'm just going to pray this all over the place.
This really fits me today.
Yes, exactly. This is exactly how I feel. Abraham lamented, Moses, Jeremiah, Elijah, Jesus. Like, there's lamentations all over the Scripture. We have multiple books that are lamentations. Obviously, Lamentations, Jeremiah, Job. Job, if you track Job's life, it's the 5 stages of grief. Like, he goes through every one of these stages and ends up with praise at the end, like Nikki was saying, that was so beautiful. Who am I? He just lets God have his future, and of course, God takes care of it.
And not to oversimplify this, but would it be fair to say that a lament is taking my loss list and bringing it to God?
Absolutely. So lament, the word lament means to mourn or to cry out. It's not the same thing as crying.
So it's one thing just to create a loss list. But I could just stay
get
stuck
mad
in that
and just
and
be like,
go through all the cycles of grief.
These are all the people that have wronged me. Yeah.
But it's another to lament it, to say, I'm going to bring it to Jesus.
Right. So the point of the loss list is to sit and cry out to God with the losses that you are aware of, and let the Spirit of God hover in this place and take control of this issue. I can cry about lots of things, and that's a natural emotional response. It's a hopeless kind of, and it's not bad, but crying out to God is taking that same grieving feeling and transferring it. I can't solve it. I'm going to give it to God, and I'm going to let him deal with it. That's what a lament is for. It's a cleansing of the spirit and transferring it into God's hands. So Psalm 34 really sums this up well. Verse 18 says, the righteous cry out, they lament, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves all those who are crushed in spirit.
Wow. Amen. Yeah,
that's pretty cool. You can clap.
Clap for lament. As I process this all the time, Sue and I talk about this a lot, to be that righteous crying out and bringing my list to Jesus. Lament is what helps us go from, to move through this
grieving to mourning.
season.
Yeah.
And move from grieving to mourning. Exactly. So, if you don't identify the grief, if you just think, oh, we've lost all these things, and well, if there's where there's loss, there's grief. So beginning to identify if you're grieving, if you're having these feelings, then identify where the loss is. There's a loss, and making the loss list isn't critical. But then not just making it, but actually bringing it to Jesus, crying out to him through this list that you make is now moving. That lament is moving you, because here's number 3. We've got to move, not just measure and manage grief, but we have to move through seasons of grief. No one can, like she said, jump ahead and say, just get to acceptance. If you're a guy like me, I'm like, okay, what do I need to do? Tell me the steps I need to do to get to that meaning part. I want to have meaning in my life. Tell me how to get to the acceptance part. Can I just skip to that? And I don't know all the answers for that. We don't have all the answers for that, but I know if we're going to move to this, we have to identify it. We have to list it. We have to lament it. And then we need to move towards mourning. After Jesus took his grief to the Father, and Matthew records this, after Jesus took his grief to the Father, he's out, remember where we left him. He's out in the boat by himself, okay, escaping, not to hide, but to bring his list to his Father. And as he laments, as he cries out to God, as he begins to mourn, here's what happens in Matthew chapter 14. Hearing of this, because there's lots of people who don't give us the time we need, right? Hearing of this, the children don't understand. Hearing that you went to the bathroom, they followed you there. Hearing that mom was about to take a nap, they decided this would be a great time for a party. Hearing that you needed some time, the world demanded, and your boss called. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. So what did Jesus do? Are you kidding me? That's what I would do. If this happened to me, what I would do is be frustrated, because I'm like, and all the people are coming to him with their illnesses. Like, really? You got a skin condition? Is that bothering you? Because my cousin just got beheaded. Okay? Because we do this all the time. You bring me your $100 loss, and I'm like not ready to hear it because I've got a $100,000 loss. And this is why we react. It just happened to me with a friend this week. I was like, they're talking to me about their grief and about their loss, and I'm just like, yeah, well, I'm grieving too. We one-up each other, Well, because you know why? Because I'm not doing what Jesus did. I'm not mourning. Because mourning moves me not just from grief, it moves me to my Father. And if I'm willing to go take that time, and we finally get to do this, right? And we do this all the time in our relationship, She's always mad at me. I'm kidding. She has.
Because you can't have ribeye anymore.
Yeah, this is why we need to share a mic so I can have it at the same time we have. Okay. She just said I'm just mad because I can't have ribeye anymore.
He's grieving the loss of all
Give me a
saturated
good
fat
steak.
and
The marbly with
processed food.
Get behind me, Satan. Come on. So if I spend time with God, then it moves me, not just through grief, it moves me closer to my Father. And here's what happened when Jesus went to his Father and began to mourn. Here's what happened, verse 14. When Jesus landed, he saw a large crowd. And he didn't do what I would do, what you would do. He had compassion on them. Jesus went to his Father with his mourning, and his Father moved him to compassion. That's how you can grieve with people who grieve, Romans 12. That's how you can grieve with those who grieve. Mourn with those who mourn. Rejoice with those who rejoice. That's how you can do this but I'm telling you, it's not possible in your grief unless you move to God, begin to mourn, and let him fill you with compassion. And not only did Jesus get filled with compassion, he got filled with power. Because what happened next? Out of a season of grief, oh my gosh, I got to stand up and preach this. Out of a season of grief, what happened next? All the people who were sick, what did they do? He healed them. You feel stuck in your grief right now, and I get that. But there is a powerful season on the other side of this dark season of grief if you'll take it and mourn it with God. Don't just act like it's not happening. Now, I may not be the right person to talk with you. Don't just take it to Jesus. You might need to take it to a professional mourner. We don't have those. Yes, we do. They're called grief counselors. They're people. We have great grief counselors in our lives, and they help us. You know what? And I come back from counseling, and I can smile again. It's
magic.
It's magic. But it's really not the degree or how amazing they are. It's the fact that we're both bringing this to God. They're helping me identify the list. And maybe you need help. Get a pastor, a mentor, but get someone who's qualified to walk with you in your loss so that we can rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. The tension, the explosion that happened in 2020, a lot of professionals are identifying now why this happened and why it's lingering and why it won't go away. Let me tell you, the grief of 2020 is not going away until you begin to intentionally grieve it. And more importantly, in the church, if we want the power of God back on the church, we better go to the Father and begin to mourn this. Healing doesn't come just because you have a conversation or because someone agrees with you. I just wish they'd see it from my point of view. No, I know. I wish I could, but right now I can't see it through this fog of grief that I'm having, of loss. Jesus is saying, come to me, all of you who are grieving, all of you who have loss, come to me. And I won't just give you rest for your bodies. I'm going to give you rest for your souls. Let me end where we began. Matthew recorded Jesus' words. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are you. Blessed are you. I've been looking at this loss list happening, people losing loved ones in the chat here, talking about a husband of 30 years and a loss, not just a sister, and then a husband also in the same year time frame. Listen, blessed are you who mourn, for you will be comforted. Jesus wants you to know that there's comfort today. There's comfort today. And the same comfort that Sue and I are experiencing is the same comfort that you can experience. We're not done experiencing it because guess what? I'm going to have more loss and more loss and more loss. This life is filled with loss. But I don't want to be stuck in my grief. If we bring it to Jesus today, perhaps you're not bringing your grief to Jesus because you haven't brought your life to Jesus. So it's kind of hard just to bring him your loss if you haven't brought him your life. And Jesus would say, That's why I came. I came and I died for you because I knew there was no way that you could work your way to have a relationship with a perfect Father in heaven in the sinful world. I knew there was no way. So God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him would not perish. He's saying, I'm not just asking you to bring your loss list to me. I'm asking you to bring your life to me. Jesus didn't just die for you. He actually was buried and he rose again. And because he's alive right now, when you bring him your life, he will bring you a new life. He won't just do it once. He will do it over and over and over again, following every loss and every loss and every loss. He will not only bring you comfort, he will bring you new life. And that's what he offers you today. So whether you came in here following Jesus or you've never made that decision, I want to give you an opportunity right now. While you're watching online, I'm going to ask you to create a moment to block out the distractions, and that may be hard to do, but block out the distractions and pray this prayer with me. And if you're here in person, I'm going to ask us to do this, to just bow our heads and close our eyes for a moment. Would you do that with me? Just block out the distractions. Just bow your head, close your eyes, block out the distractions. And you say, Pastor Shane, I'm not sure I've ever given my life to Jesus the way you're saying. I want to bring him my loss, but more importantly, I want to bring him my life today. I believe that he died for me, that he can forgive me. And because he's alive, I want his new life in me. If you say, that's me, I want you to just simply raise your hand and say, I want to pray that prayer with you. You can raise your hand online. If you're watching online, click and raise your hand. But if you'd like to pray this prayer with me, it's not a magical prayer, but it's a prayer from the heart that I'll lead us through. If you'd like to pray this prayer and cross the line of faith and bring your life to Jesus today, would you just raise your hand right now? I have folks helping me up here because I don't want to miss one of you. Just raise your hand and look at me and acknowledge it, and I'll acknowledge you and you can put it right back down. Anyone else? Yes, thank you. I see you. Anyone else back here? Yes, thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else? How about over here? I've got some folks helping me because I don't want to miss. This is the most important decision you'd ever make in your whole lives. Anyone else with these? I want to pray that prayer with you, Pastor. I want to pray that prayer with you. Yes, thank you. I see that. And yes, thank you. I see you up there. Anyone else with these? In our church family, we don't want anyone to pray alone. So I want to do this with you. We're all going to pray this prayer together. And to you, it may be the most meaningful prayer you've ever prayed. To us, it's going to be us coming alongside you, praying with you. So if you're watching online, you can do this at home too. But pray this prayer out loud. Everyone prays, no one prays alone. Together, repeat after me. Jesus, I bring you my life. I believe that you died for me. And I ask you to forgive me. I bring you my loss. And more importantly, I bring you my life. And because you are alive, I receive new life today. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, church, can we celebrate those coming into the kingdom of God? Come on. There are people coming and giving their lives to Jesus today. This is the best day of your life if you made that decision.